You're in a coffee shop in Berlin. Your American friend just showed you his Vanguard account on his phone, up 27% this year. Then he asks about your portfolio. You mumble something about European ETFs and pull up your account, up 11%. Same time period. He doesn't say anything, but you both see it. The gap. And it's not the first time you've noticed. Every personal finance video, every investment guru, every wealth-building success story seems to come from the same place: America. Meanwhile, you're sitting in Europe wondering if you're playing a completely different game with completely different rules. And here's the thing that keeps you up at night. Maybe you are. My name is Leo. I learned investing in the United States, then moved to Europe and spent 9 years figuring out what actually works here. If you're trying to build wealth in Europe while watching American investors seemingly print money, make sure to hit that subscribe button because we're about to break down something nobody talks about honestly: the real difference between European and American investing in 2026. And I'm going to show you why the answer isn't what you think. Because here's what everyone gets wrong about this comparison. They look at the headline numbers, declare America the winner, and move on. The S&P 500 returned 12.3% annually from 2010 to 2025, while the MSCI Europe Index returned 8.9%. Case closed, right? America wins. Except that's not how it actually works. That's like comparing two marathon runners and declaring the winner based on who's ahead at mile 10. You're missing the entire second half of the race. The real question isn't which market has higher returns. The real question is which system allows the average person to actually build and keep wealth over a lifetime. And when you factor in everything: healthcare costs, tax treatment, currency risk, employment stability, and the psychological costs of each system, the answer gets a lot more complicated. What I'm about to show you next took me 6 years of living in both systems to fully understand. Let's start with what everyone sees first: the returns. And yes, American stock market returns have been higher. Over the past 15 years, the S&P 500 crushed European indices. But here's what nobody tells you about that number. The S&P 500 uses survivorship bias. When a company fails or becomes irrelevant, it gets removed from the index and replaced with a winner. It's like measuring the average grade in a class, but kicking out every student who fails before you calculate it. The MSCI Europe does this too, but the effect is smaller because European indices are more diversified across sectors rather than concentrated in a few mega-cap tech companies. And that concentration matters more than most people realize. As of 2026, the top 10 companies in the S&P 500 represent 33% of the entire index. That's 1/3 of the index determined by 10 companies: Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, Alphabet, Meta, Tesla. The Magnificent Seven plus a few others. If you're invested in the S&P 500, you're not diversified across the American economy. You're concentrated in big tech. European indices spread risk differently. The top 10 companies in the MSCI Europe represent about 19%. That's still concentration, but it's almost half the level of the S&P. Now, I know what you're thinking. So what? Concentration worked. American tech companies delivered massive returns. And you're right, they did, past tense. But concentration cuts both ways. When those companies go up, you win big. When they stumble, you lose big. And we've seen this movie before. In the late 90s, tech stocks dominated the S&P. Everyone said this time it's different. Then the dot-com crash happened, and the S&P 500 took 13 years to recover to its previous high. European investors who were diversified across sectors recovered faster. But let's talk about the costs, because this is where things get interesting. In America, you can invest in Vanguard's VOO, an S&P 500 ETF, for an expense ratio of 0.03%, 3 basis points. Essentially free. In Europe, if you want exposure to global stocks through a UCITS ETF like Vanguard's FTSE All World, you're paying 0.22%. That's over 7 times higher. That difference compounds. On a €100,000 portfolio over 25 years, that extra cost is about €18,000 in lost returns. But here's the twist. European investors using UCITS ETFs structured in Ireland get better dividend withholding tax treatment than Americans in many cases. The United States withholds 30% on dividends paid to foreign investors. Ireland-based UCITS funds have tax treaties that reduce this to 15%. So while European investors pay higher management fees, they keep more of their dividend income if they're investing in American stocks through Irish domiciled funds. The math gets complicated fast, and depending on your specific country's tax treaty and the composition of your portfolio, one structure might beat the other by a few tenths of a percent annually. And speaking of taxes, this is where the real divergence happens. In the United States, long-term capital gains are taxed at 0, 15, or 20% depending on income, plus whatever your state charges. If you live in Florida or Texas with no state income tax and you're in the 0% federal bracket, you can realize investment gains completely tax-free. If you're in California, you're paying up to 13.3% state tax on top of federal rates, pushing your effective rate near 35%. In Europe, it's a patchwork that would make a tax accountant weep. Belgium taxes capital gains at 0% for most investors, but 35% on certain transactions. The Netherlands doesn't tax capital gains at all, but taxes a deemed return on your assets. Germany taxes capital gains at 26.3075%. France is 30% flat. Ireland is 33%. Denmark hits 42%. Some countries give you allowances. The UK gives you an annual exemption of £3,000 before capital gains tax kicks in. Portugal exempts capital gains on stocks held over a year if certain conditions are met. The result? An American investor in a low-tax state can build wealth almost entirely tax-free if they stay under income thresholds. A European investor pays tax regardless of strategy in most countries. Over 30 years of compounding, this is the difference between retiring at 55 and retiring at 62. Same discipline, same contributions, different tax systems. Now we're getting to the part that actually matters, and this is what took me years to understand. Because if we stopped here, America would look like the obvious winner. Higher returns, lower costs, better tax treatment. Pack your bags, move to Texas, start investing. But here's the thing, we're still only looking at half the equation. Let's talk about healthcare. In America, the average family health insurance premium in 2026 is about $22,000 per year. That's the premium you pay just to have insurance. Then you have deductibles, copays, out-of-pocket maximums. A typical family with employer-sponsored insurance pays another $5,000 to $8,000 per year in actual healthcare costs. Let's call it $28,000 total. And that's if nobody gets seriously ill. In Europe, you pay for healthcare through taxes. Higher taxes, yes, but the out-of-pocket costs are near zero in most countries. Let's say you're in Germany paying an extra 10,000 euros per year in taxes compared to an equivalent American. That American is paying $28,000, about 25,000 euros for healthcare. You're paying 10,000 through taxes. That's 15,000 euros of annual savings every single year. Here's what that 15,000 euros means for wealth building. If you invest that difference annually for 25 years at 7% returns, you accumulate 493,000 euros, nearly €500,000 from healthcare savings alone. This is why comparing investment returns in isolation is meaningless. The American might have better market returns, but they're hemorrhaging cash on healthcare that the European isn't. And it gets better. Or worse, depending on your perspective. When Americans retire, they need to save enough not just to cover living expenses, but to cover healthcare until they qualify for Medicare at 65. If you retire at 60, that's 5 years of private health insurance at potentially $30,000 to $40,000 per year. That's $200,000 you need just to bridge to Medicare. And Medicare isn't free either. Premiums, supplemental insurance, prescription drug coverage, you're still paying several $100s per month minimum. Fidelity estimates that the average couple retiring at 65 in 2026 will need about $315,000 just to cover healthcare costs in retirement. That's separate from living expenses. European retirees need almost none of that. State healthcare continues. The retirement number calculation completely changes. An American needs to accumulate $1 to $2 million to retire comfortably. A European needs 600,000 to 800,000 euros for the same lifestyle because healthcare is covered. Let me check in with you for a second. If you've made it this far, you're already thinking about this differently than 90% of people who just look at stock returns and call it a day. But don't stop now, because what comes next explains why some of the wealthiest Europeans I know wouldn't move to America even if you paid them. Employment stability. In Europe, labor protections are strong, getting fired is difficult. Redundancy comes with severance packages. Unemployment benefits are generous and long-lasting. In the Netherlands, you can collect unemployment for 24 months at 70 to 75% of your last salary. In France, you can get up to 2 years at 57 to 75%. In Germany, up to 12 months at 60 to 67%. In America, employment is at will in most states. You can be fired tomorrow for almost any reason. Unemployment benefits max out at 26 weeks in most states, sometimes less, and rarely replace more than 40 to 50% of your income. The average unemployment benefit in America is about $350 per week. That's about $18,000 per year. Try living on that in any major American city. This affects investing psychology in ways that don't show up in return calculations. European investors can take more risk with their invested capital because their employment is more stable and their safety net is stronger. If you lose your job, you're not immediately destitute. You have time to find the right next move. American investors need to keep larger emergency funds and be more conservative with risk because the downside of job loss is catastrophic. You can have the best investment strategy in the world, but if you're forced to sell everything at a loss because you lost your job and burned through savings in 3 months, your returns don't matter. Housing. Americans love to point out that housing is more affordable in the United States, and in many markets that's true. The median house price to income ratio in the United States is about 4 to 5 in most markets outside the expensive coastal cities. In Europe, you're looking at 8 to 12 in major cities. London is 14, Paris is 15, Munich is 16. That means European millennials are locked out of homeownership in a way that Americans aren't in most markets. But here's the other side. American homeownership comes with property taxes that never end. In Texas, property tax averages 2 to 2.5% of home value per year. On a $500,000 home, that's $12,500 annually, forever. In New Jersey, it's over 2%. Illinois, over 2%. Compare that to Europe. France has a housing tax, but it's far lower. Germany's property tax is minimal. The UK has council tax, but it's based on property bans, not continuously rising with market value. An American who pays off their mortgage still owes $12,000 per year in property taxes. A European who pays off their mortgage in Germany might owe a few hundred euros. Over a 30-year retirement, that's a difference of $300,000 or more. The American needs to save an extra $300,000 just to keep their house in retirement. And we haven't even talked about the regulatory nightmare that is UCITS versus American ETFs. European investors are blocked from buying American-domiciled ETFs directly because of PRIIP's regulations. You can't just open a Vanguard account and buy VO. You have to use UCITS equivalents, which are European versions of American funds structured to comply with European regulations. This means higher fees, as we discussed, but it also means slightly different holdings, different rebalancing schedules, and tracking error. American investors can buy anything. European ETFs, Asian ETFs, emerging market ETFs, whatever, no restrictions. European investors are fenced into UCITS-compliant products. It's a smaller sandbox. And yes, that sandbox still contains excellent investment options. Vanguard, iShares, and others offer UCITS versions of nearly every major index, but you're paying more for access and you have fewer niche options. Now let's talk about the thing nobody wants to discuss: culture. And this might be the biggest difference of all. In America, talking about money is normal, common, expected. You go to a barbecue and someone mentions they just refinanced their mortgage at 3.2% and restructured their portfolio to be more tax efficient, and everyone nods along, like this is regular conversation. In much of Europe, talking about money is taboo. It's considered crass, impolite, showing off. This cultural difference has massive implications for wealth building. In America, you're surrounded by people openly discussing strategies, sharing what worked, comparing notes. You learn through osmosis. In Europe, everyone is struggling with the same problems in isolation because nobody talks about it. You don't know if your friends are investing, what they're invested in, or how much they have saved. You're flying blind. This is why American personal finance content dominates YouTube, podcasts, and blogs. Because Americans treat wealth building as a normal topic of conversation and education, Europeans treat it like Fight Club. The first rule is you don't talk about it, and that silence costs you money. Because you don't learn from other people's mistakes. You don't get peer pressure to start investing early. You don't have the social reinforcement that keeps you disciplined during market crashes. I've watched this play out in real life. My American friends talk openly about maxing out their retirement accounts, about their asset allocation, about whether they should pay off their mortgage early or invest the difference. My European friends talk about literally anything else. And when I bring up investing, there's this awkward pause like I just asked about their bathroom habits. The result? Americans start investing earlier on average, contribute more consistently, and stick with their strategy through volatility because they have a community reinforcing those behaviors. Europeans start later, contribute less consistently, and panic sell during crashes because they're making decisions in isolation without perspective. Now let me tie all of this together, because when you see how these pieces connect, everything changes. The question isn't whether American stocks return more than European stocks. The question is whether the total system, market returns plus costs plus taxes plus healthcare plus housing plus employment stability plus culture, allows you to build more wealth over a lifetime. And here's the honest answer. It depends. If you're young, healthy, high income, living in a low-tax American state, working in a stable industry, and you're disciplined about investing, America offers the highest ceiling. You can accumulate wealth faster. If you hit the right career trajectory, the American system rewards you more than any European system will. But, and this is a big but, the floor is much lower. If you get sick, if you lose your job, if you make a few bad decisions, the American system will chew you up and spit you out. You can go from comfortable to bankrupt faster than in any European country. The safety nets are thin. The costs are predatory. One medical emergency can undo a decade of disciplined saving. Europe offers a lower ceiling but a much higher floor. You probably won't get as rich as fast, but you also probably won't end up destitute. The system protects you from catastrophic downside. You can take more career risks because failure isn't fatal. You can invest more aggressively because you have a safety net. And you don't need to save as much for retirement because healthcare is covered. For the median person, the one who isn't going to be a tech entrepreneur or investment banker, both systems produce a comfortable retirement if you start early and stay disciplined. The American might retire with $1.2 million. The European might retire with 700,000 euros. But the European needed less because their ongoing costs are lower. When you adjust for purchasing power and healthcare costs, they're in similar positions. The real difference isn't the system, it's investor behavior. And this is the part where most people check out, but don't be most people. Because the uncomfortable truth is that most people in both systems fail at building wealth. Americans have access to the best investment vehicles in the world with the lowest costs and the best tax treatment, and most of them still retire broke. The median American retirement account balance at age 65 is $73,000 according to Vanguard's How America Saves report. That's not a typo. $73,000 after a lifetime of working. Europeans aren't much better. The average retirement savings across the European Union is similarly dismal. Most people rely almost entirely on state pensions. They had access to investment accounts, to compound growth, to wealth-building tools. They just didn't use them, or they used them wrong, or they started too late. The system matters less than what you do within the system. An American who doesn't invest and spends everything they earn will retire poor despite having the best investment infrastructure in the world. A European who starts investing at 25, contributes consistently, keeps costs low, and stays invested through volatility will retire wealthy despite higher fees and taxes. This is the thing that took me years to accept. I spent so much time analyzing which system was better that I almost missed the bigger point. The system is only 10 or 20% of the equation. Your behavior is 80%. Do you start early? Do you contribute consistently? Do you avoid panic selling? Do you keep your costs low? Do you increase contributions as your income grows? Those decisions matter infinitely more than whether you're investing in America or Europe. But here's what each system does better, and this is worth understanding. America is better for aggressive wealth accumulation if you can handle the risk and you have the discipline. The tools are better, the costs are lower, the taxes are friendlier. The culture supports you. If you're the kind of person who will actually max out tax-advantaged accounts every year, who will maintain a diversified portfolio, who will stay invested through crashes, America gives you a better outcome. Europe is better for sustainable wealth building with protection from catastrophe. You won't accumulate as fast, but you also won't get destroyed by medical bills or job loss. The system forces more savings through higher taxes but then provides services that would bankrupt you in America. If you're risk averse or you value stability over maximum returns, Europe is better. And here's the final piece that matters. The one nobody talks about. Happiness. Because you can have all the money in the world, but if you're stressed about healthcare, terrified of losing your job, or working 70 hours per week to afford it all, what's the point? I know Americans with seven-figure net worths who are miserable because they're trapped in jobs they hate to keep health insurance. I know Europeans with more modest savings who retired early because their cost structure allows it and they're living amazing lives. The best system is the one that aligns with your values. If you value maximum wealth accumulation and you're willing to accept higher risk and less stability, America might be better. If you value security, work-life balance, and protection from catastrophic risk, Europe might be better. But both systems work if you work them. What's your next move? Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're investing from and what your biggest challenge is. Is it getting started? Is it staying consistent? Is it figuring out the tax implications in your country? Let me know, because that's what this channel is for. Taking the complex financial questions you're actually facing and breaking them down into something useful. Your future self, the one sipping coffee in retirement without financial stress, is counting on the decisions you make right now. Not the decisions you make in America versus Europe, but the decision to start, to stay consistent, to ignore the noise, and to build wealth within whatever system you're in. Because here's the secret that the personal finance industry doesn't want you to know. The system doesn't determine your outcome nearly as much as they want you to believe. You do.